welcome to the second broadcast of Book Lovers Corner for 2019. We're being broadcast by the Wairarapa Community Access radio station, Arrow FM 92.7, every fourth Tuesday of the month at 3:30 to 4:30 throughout the year. This is one of 12 community access radio stations in New Zealand. We are sponsored by our wonderful independent bookshop in Carterton, Elmo's Books, which has a Facebook page you'll find interesting. You can listen to our program live online by connecting in with Arrow FM, or listen later via a podcast which you can download. When you log into Arrow FM's website, you'll see a list down the left-hand side, which is podcasts. Then listen live. Select the option you want, look for the Book Lovers Corner and click onto it. We can also be watched on Freeview Channel 41. We'd appreciate your feedback that you can offer, and by contacting the station's Facebook page. Indicating a like for the program would help us find out more about our as yet mostly unknown audience. We do know we have some local, national and international listeners, and as mentioned last month, we have a slightly new team this year for the past 3 years. I'm Valda Kirkwood, and I've been part of the team for the past 3 years. The other members of the team are Gareth Rapson. Greetings, Gareth.
Good afternoon.
And Sue Lawrence from Elmo's Books.
Hello there.
Sometimes we will also have a contributor of the last 3 years, Julie Crosslin, joining us as an occasional contributor. Now, the outline for the program for today is an initial discussion for about 10 minutes on things we've been reading or things that have interested us in the world of books in the last month. Gareth will then discuss his books, Love is Blind by William Boyd, and talk about his other most recent book, Historic Sheep Stations of New Zealand by Colin Wheeler. Sue will discuss A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles and preview a new book by Ian McEwan, Machines Like Us. And then we'll have a music break for about 3 minutes. And afterwards, I will be talking about the 3 recent books by Sarah Paretsky, David Baldacci, and Robert Galbraith. And at the end, we will summarise the details of the books that we have talked about today. So first of all, the last month, anything that's cropped up in your reading or anything to do with books, Gareth?
An interesting month, and there's always a pile of books that swirl around you. And quickly, some of the ones I've read less by Andrew, I think it's Andrew Greer, which won the Pulitzer Prize, and I'd probably like to talk about that in a future program. Joe, I had a look at a book called Bomber Boys because for some reason I'm curious about when Peter Jackson's going to make this remake of the Dam Busters, and that book caught me, and there was also a sort of George Orwell's extracts on how he looks at freedom from a very contemporary view today, which I think was really interesting. So that's the reading for over the last month. But how about you, Sue?
Well, I've been reading A Gentleman in Moscow, but from the shop's point of view, I can tell you what's been hot. Eleanor Oliphant is completely fine, has continued to be a really good seller, and it's one that I read over Christmas, and also Julie has previously reviewed favourably. Michelle Obama's book Becoming has been a top seller here and internationally. Jack Reacher continues to sell. A couple of local books that have been on our bestseller list are a book about fruit tree pruning by Kath Irvine, who has a garden on the Kapiti Coast, and a book called Relax, written by one of the GPs in Greytown.
How intriguing.
And has sold really well. And of course, Wonky Donkey, building on the YouTube fame, has continued to go out the door.
That is extraordinary, isn't it? Sort of for yet another month. And I also get Page and Blackmore, which is the independent bookshop in Nelson, and the Harry McCleary series continues to go out their door. And so Linley Dodd and Harry McCleary series and the Wonky Donkey are just ongoing bestsellers. It's extraordinary. It's wonderful.
Yeah, they must have in a bookshop, really.
Yeah.
Could we cut back to this book on pruning? I mean, that really is, an extraordinary little fact. I mean, it's selling.
I think we may have sold nearly 40 copies, which is astonishing for us in Carterton.
How extraordinary. What do you think that says about the locality and the local people?
I think people are looking for practical help without any gloss. It's quite a small book. It's well illustrated, but just black and white pictures. She gives common sense advice and is very reassuring. You can do this, she says.
And this is a local author of them?
Kapiti Coast.
Well, that, I mean, it just is, isn't it interesting finding out what's going out the door?
Yeah.
I have been in the past month getting into Empress of the East, which is the story of a slave girl in the Ottoman Empire who then became a concubine and then married Suleiman the Great, Suleiman I. And I am finding it absolutely fascinating learning about how the Ottoman Empire came to be, what it was in competition with at that time. And so I'm hoping to talk about that in a future session of Book Lovers Corner.
Good.
It also brings into being the whole business of the Byzantine Empire as well as the Ottoman and what's happening in Turkey today. So I'm having been very fortunate to have spent over a month going around circumnavigating Turkey in 2011. It raised a lot of interest for me in the history of Turkey and its surrounds. And I think, Gareth, you've been to Turkey too, haven't you?
Several times, and I can look forward to turning away from the History Channel and turning into hearing a bit about the Ottomans. And
I can remember when I first shifted into my neighbourhood, and Gareth, you were living next door, and a neighbour across the road, Judy, to find that all three of us had been in Cappadocia and a hot air ballooned in Cappadocia, and how amazing it is to get into a locality where different lots of neighbours have actually had the same sort of adventure. Another book that I have been looking at is No Friend But the Mountains, which is by Buraz Bochani, an amazing story of which I've got to, I have yet to start, but it won the Victoria Premier's Prize this past year, the richest book prize in Australia for non-fiction. It was written totally on Manus Island because Bochani has been imprisoned on Manus Island since 2013. He is an Iranian Kurd. He's a playwright. He's a film. He makes films. He's a poet. The book itself was written on a cell phone, a mobile, and through WhatsApp sent across the ether to his translator in Australia. And what an amazing journey that book has had to be published now. And in addition to that, he he is still on Manus Island, but he, I think, is what is happening to people there is now much more out into the world. The book itself breaks all genres because there's poetry, there's autobiography, there's biography, and there's thoughts and feelings of what it's like to be imprisoned.
There's no doubt that today we pretty well, once a week or so there'll be a pretty major incident that gathers our attention about these centres, and our Australian neighbours' attempts to manage it. And I'm just thankful that it's not an issue for New Zealand.
Yeah. I think there are, yes, as you say, yet, but we are very blessed living in a country which has borders with no other country, and one of the few in the world where that is the case. It also has made me interested in addition to my interest in Turkey and its history with the Ottoman Empire, the Byzantine, early Roman, Greek empires, I've become interested in the Kurds, and so I have got a book out of the Carterton Library called The Kurds, by A Modern History of the Kurds by David McDowell, and it is quite an old one, but I don't think that alters history at all. And so again, that's another area that I would like to focus on in a future Book Lovers Corner. I think now, shall we focus on today's contributions? Gareth, would you like to start with your Lover's Blind by William Boyd?
Sure. Now, when we look at novels, I'm always curious about the span that they encompass in the tale, and the way that they look at the human condition. I mean, Nabokov said, look, we just live in a little brief patch of light between, two great, endless periods of darkness, and what we can capture about ourselves in books is fascinated readers. We have books that were like one day, with Ulysses, or I think Virginia Woolf's Wave. We have books that struggle with the fact that we're all kind of opaque and mysterious to even those who are closest to us. But novels sort of somehow get into engaging with this. But the cradle to grave novel is relatively rare. So you may have remembered probably in your English studies looking at something like Tristram Shandy by Smollett, or Jude the Obscure. And we've had books that have treated this span in different ways. Martin Amis's like Time's Arrow, where he started from the grave and went right back to his birth. We had books like Hilary Mantel's trilogy, even though we've only got the two, which looked at Cromwell's life in its entirety. But our author today, William Boyd, who's written 14 novels, 5 of them have been of this big span. And today's book, we're going to look at this one. But just before we start with that, I'd like to insert this book, which is called Any Human Heart, and which is, of all his books, he says he gets more letters about this book than any other. I would say of my reading life that this would be in my top 20 books, lifetime. So, and it is absolutely a sensationally terrific book, and urge you to read it. But it is our topic today is Lover's Blind. Now it starts on an island off India, and we're curious about why our hero Brodie Moncur is there, and then it cuts back to 1896 in Scotland, and we learn a little bit about his growing up. his aspirations in music, and he lives in a with a large family, with a sort of tyrannical, religious, preaching father who he and him clash like nobody else, and it is difficult and a challenging time for him as a young man growing up. Failing as a musician, he turns to becoming involved in the piano industry because he has a perfect ear, perfect pitch, and he suddenly finds that pianos and his perfect ear are a way of making money. He joins Shannon and Co., a firm in Edinburgh, and suddenly our 24-year-old hero is in Paris. He's sent there to help the business, which is not doing so well, and suddenly we're in this exotic Paris life, and he does the business really well. He encourages, he's entrepreneurial, and he gets the idea that let's hire a top pianist and go on tour with him using Shannon pianos. And he meets up with John Kilbarron, his mistress Lydia, a Russian exotic opera singing magnificent woman, and John's rather sinister brother Malachi. And suddenly the tale explodes. He is down in Nice, and then the tale swirls into St. Petersburg in Russia, and we get the slow burning thriller. And that is going to arc over about 7 or 8 years and then end and take us back to the island in India. It's a great novel. But it's not his best. But I still enjoyed it, and if you're a fan of William Boyd, and he has written some, excellent, especially I really do like his later work rather than his earlier African settings. But this is a book that snakes and ladders. Things are always on the move, and it's looking at sort of the ordinary aspect and randomness of life, where intertwined with a great love. And so that's the pitch. I notice it's at the bookshop. It sells? Yes.
Despite the number of novels he's written, not many people know him.
Right.
He suffers in comparison, yeah. But his books, they're well researched, aren't they? Well researched. He takes about 3 years to write one, apparently.
Right, and he is, immensely popular in the UK and I imagine in Europe. He's a screenwriter and has had a lot of success for that. There are adaptations of his work, and I think his books are, this is more a throwback to a historical thriller, but his more contemporary books, like he wrote a James Bond book, Solo, and he wrote, probably one of my favourite ones was Ordinary Thunderstorms, which is a great London setting, very, very modern. So a writer that can reach into any time and tell a great tale.
That would make a great film, I think.
Yeah, but it's the challenge of getting decades of life, in this, which was a 3-part BBC starring Jim Broadbent as the older character in this. And this one, though, old Brody doesn't live long. Not that I want too many spoilers here, but he lives a life driven by a great love of Lydia, as he embarks on this affair that is kind of absolutely fraught and dangerous, and we are going to twist and turn with him through what fate throws at him at the turn of the 19th century.
Thank you, Gareth. If we have time at the end, perhaps we'll come back to your second one about the sheep stations.
Sure.
But I think now we'll move on to you, Sue.
Okay. Well, I'm going to start with Amor Towles' A Gentleman in Moscow, which is not quite the whole of our hero's life, but it does account for a considerable part of it, most of which is spent in the Metropole, a very marvellous hotel
Which
in
I
Moscow,
happened to
which Velda's
stay-
been to.
I stayed in there in 1975 at the end of my Trans-Siberian adventure. And I recall it, most of us were, sort of young backpacker type people from Australia and New Zealand, but there were others, and we were in what was called the hard class, and there were others who were a wealthier Australian couple who were in the soft class, and so they had a whole carriage to themselves, whereas we sort of had four of us, on much harder sort of couchettes, whatever. And I can remember being invited up to their apartment in the Metropole where we stayed, and most of us had sort of pretty perfunctory, bedrooms. And we went up, and they had the most magnificent bathrooms. My abiding memory of the Metropole is this couple's bathroom, which was the size of our bedrooms of the rest of us, and it was all marble. It was just of the like I had never seen before. So I was just very thrilled to see that. So when you mentioned Metropole, so a whole flood of memories came back.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
Where is it located in Moscow?
Oh, I would have no idea.
It's opposite the Kremlin.
Oh, so it's right in the heart of
Well,
the
I can
whole.
remember walking to the Kremlin, so
Yes, you can see the Kremlin
Yes.
from the hotel.
yes. But it was 1975, so it was very, very simple times where, we weren't equipped with our own plug for the sinks and loo paper and things like that. So, and had very, very large, grumpy women on each floor, and you knew your mail had been opened, and it was very different times.
But Sue, how does our hero end up in the hotel?
Well, he has been living in the hotel for some time. He's an aristocrat. He is, in fact, Count Alexander Ilyich Rostov, and he has returned to live in Russia after some years of living in Paris. The story opens with the Count being put on trial for being an unapologetic aristocrat. But fortunately for the Count, he's not taken out and summarily shot in front of a wall, because he's been the author of a pre-revolutionary poem which still has some favour amongst some of the high-ups in the party. He is allowed to be escorted out of the Kremlin, across the square, into the Metropole, but he is confined there for the rest of his life on pain of death. So he is moved forcibly from his beautiful suite up to the attic. He's allowed to take some select furniture, and he selects those quite carefully. One is a very heavy desk, which is actually the legs of which are filled with gold coins. So he's a man who plays the long game. He doesn't mess around. So the Count is an heroic figure, really. He is 6'3". He is the recipient of the Order of St Andrew, member of the Jockey Club and Master of the Hunt. He's a pre-revolutionary poet and is possessed of magnificent moustaches. He's also a gentleman in the true sense of a gentleman. He is considerate, intelligent. He is a man of breeding, courteous. He takes pride in his appearance. He's interested in other people. His background is obviously wealthy, but that doesn't come across in his dealings with the staff and residents of the hotel. He's very equable.
So this is a true story?
No, this is fiction, but true figures, real figures do feature. But the interesting thing about this, because he's confined to the hotel, the post-revolution, the great movements of population through the Ukraine, the forcible people forcibly being sent to the gulag, the famines, they happen outside. But he hears about them from the various guests and the staff, so he's aware of them. And he has a great childhood friend, Mishka, who unfortunately has to endure some of the hardships outside, but he keeps coming back through the novel. But the other main characters are two young girls. One at the beginning of the book is about 9. Her name is Nina, and she is a resident in the hotel, and they strike up a very unlikely friendship. As time goes by, that friendship is maintained, and when she is about 18 or 19 and caught up in the post-revolutionary fervour, she decides that she's going to do her bit for Russia, and she disappears into somewhere to help agriculture or industry or somewhere unknown. But before she does so, she leaves Alexander with her daughter, who is at that point 5, Sophia, and he raises Sophia in the hotel, which is really unlikely, but he has the support of the wonderful staff who keep his secret that, she lives there, but she does not live there. So she is she's a great character, and she grows up under his care. So when the novel starts, he's about 30. It finishes when he's about 60. He has a wonderful life in the hotel. He does not want for friends. And the other thing I need to mention, of course, too, is that the book has a series of footnotes throughout, which also bring in the outside events and provide some sort of wry commentary on what Alexander is currently up to. He's an engaging fellow. It's a great read. I can recommend it. I read an interview with the author, Amor Tolles, who was asked, does this book have a central theme? And he says, I certainly hope not. In crafting a novel, I do not have an essential message I'm trying to communicate. Rather, I hope to create a work of art that, while being satisfyingly cohesive, contains such a richness of images, ideas and personalities that it can prompt varied responses from reader to reader and from reading to reading. So I think that's a great statement from the author, and this is only his second book. So,
well, I look forward to reading it on the ferry on Sunday, Sue. Thank
exactly.
you.
Yes, enjoy.
And so, if I remember, he moves from guest to actually he becomes a member of the staff, like the concierge, and
he
becomes the sort of the driving force behind the management of the hotel and becomes indispensable.
He does. He, after a couple of years of his forced incarceration, he has a bit of a crisis, and he decides that he's going to end it because he's not for himself, but he is concerned about Russia. He's very worried about where Russia is headed, so he decides to end it. But fate intervenes, and he decides that, in fact, the essence of Russia is still there, and he's happy to continue to live in it. And that's when he decides to become a staff member.
I found, when I read it, that what I was intrigued with was about the fact of the man's character, wonderfully educated, multi-fluent in many languages, and having an incredible sense of style that the sort of coming from a very, very privileged aristocratic background, he was able to retain that with whether he met from high to low. We had this wonderful gift of humanness, and you're just engaged with this, his compassion, his understanding, his insight, with all he meets, and you were cheering from him all the way. He is, and he has qualities that you think, could I rise to that? To have qualities like that in these situations, and that's often the gift of a novel, that we are so involved with his point of view and his kind of nuanced interaction with some fabulously drawn other minor characters.
Yes,
That some wonderful, some not so wonderful. But if you want a page turner, I would totally commend this book.
Agreed.
I look forward to that. But does it make you thoughtful about Russia?
I think definitely, and I think the footnotes help in that. It brings the reality of what was actually happening in Russia. It starts off in 1922, which is just after the revolution, and the party is just making its inroads into people's everyday lives, really.
Because these politicians are coming to dine
the metropole.
in the metro, and he is observing them. I found the history was kind of like deep in the background of it, and it was kind of sort of like osmosis. You were getting a feeling that, in fact, our view of history, of Russian history, can be quite stark and brutal as we looked at, from a distance. This brings a human face to these essentially men who are grappling with the consequences of revolution and a flawed, what was to turn out to be a flawed economic path that they were on. And we know the consequences of it. Multi-layered. I think you can enjoy this, but essentially in the heart of this, there is a narrative arc that engages you from page one.
Yep. I think the characters have a real passion for their country as well. That comes through.
Yes.
Okay.
So do you want to introduce a preview of Ian McEwan's Machines Like Us?
Machines Like Me and People Like You.
Oh.
So Ian McEwan is the author of Atonement and the Children's Act.
Yeah, which has just been on in the movie. Well, still around.
Which reminds me that this is going to be filmed with Kenneth Branagh in the leading role.
That would be worthwhile looking forward to.
Yeah. So Ian's book is set in London. It's set in a parallel universe of the 1980s. Some aspects of the 1980s ring true, but otherwise, Great Britain has just lost the Falklands War. Driverless vehicles have been around for a long time. And Alan Turing, who did not die, clearly, has developed synthetic humans. And your discussion about what it means to be human is equally true here, what it means to be human. And so the main character, the previous book is a very character-driven novel. This one is not so much. In fact, the characters Charlie and Miranda are rather bland. The lively bits come from Adam, who's the synthetic human. So Alan Turing has developed 25 of these synthetic humans, 13 female Eves and 12 Adams. And Charlie, who works from home, earns a bit on some sort of internet gambling or share buying or something like that, spends his inheritance of £86,000 on purchasing this synthetic human, this Adam. He brings him home with a book of instructions, or he's delivered actually, with a book of instructions, most of which Charlie ignores. But the prime one, while he's charging, is that you can actually program personality and character traits into this synthetic human. He's blank. So while he's warming up, he also enlists help from the love of his life, Miranda, who lives upstairs. She's a student, and so we don't know what character traits they are programming in. We have to pick that up as the novel progresses. Charlie just says he doesn't want him to be a duplicate of himself. So Adam comes to life and he starts to take on a personality, and he's very smart, very astute, and he starts to pick things up. He in fact warns Charlie about trusting Miranda. Rightly so, because Miranda has a deep and rather dirty secret, which we learn about in the book, which makes you not really want to trust Miranda at all. Even more interestingly, a love triangle develops between the two of them and Adam. And so Adam experiences sex and poetry with Miranda, and he starts to write her haiku in her praise. He also begins to challenge Charlie, so it becomes an uncomfortable ménage à trois. One day in the park, Charlie and Miranda come across a mother who is beating her child, a young boy, Mark. And Charlie intervenes. The mother goes off at him, but the father says, well, you can have him if you want him, which is a pretty startling statement. Soon after, the father in fact does deliver young Mark to the door, and they take him in. Adam has a negative reaction to Mark, but he does say that social services need to know about this, and social services are called in, and not unsurprisingly, Mark's life continues to go downhill after that. So the troubled household continues. Miranda takes Charlie home to see her father, who has health problems. It's quite an amusing scene where the father has heard about this robot and he thinks that Charlie is the robot, so that's quite a funny exchange. The household, in fact, prospers as well, because Adam becomes the principal income earner. He takes over the running of the house, and he manages things to such an extent that Charlie is finally forced to take an action which brings a sudden end to what has been going on. So this is a book really about the moral questions about what it takes to be human, and
which he actually interacted with, like in the Children's Act, was also showing up ethical dilemmas.
Yes.
And
which is what he focuses on in his writing.
Yes, yeah.
And where does this rate in the Parthenon of McEwan? Is it?
I don't know. I just think because the topic is, the thing is so topical. I mean, it's like, be careful what you wish for, in a way. It did make me think, and I enjoyed reading it. It's not all happiness with these synthetic humans and their human colleagues. It becomes apparent after a while that they are starting to commit suicide. Right. They can't stand.
Who, the humans or the...
No, the synthetic humans start to take their own lives.
Not too many spoiler alerts here.
No.
I think we might...
Yeah.
Because it sounds like a terrific book. So
it is a terrific book. It is. It definitely makes you think, and it stayed with me, and it's a couple of weeks since I read it. But it's still quite top
because
of
you're
mind.
talking about it very passionately. I'll have to add it onto my list.
I just want to read you one of Adam's haiku, and this is his last message. Our leaves are falling. Come spring we will renew, but you, alas, fall once.
Oh.
So be careful what you wish for, indeed.
I mean, this is the world of AI. It's sort of like, it's like a wave coming towards it, and we have our little robot lawnmowers and little robots that we see, but nothing on the scale of this. But of course, that's where it's all going. I mean,
Why do you
more and more
why-
sophisticated.
Yeah. I've been mulling over why he would set it in the 80s if it's so futuristic
Yeah.
or current. Yeah.
Maybe it's avoid a sort of science fiction kind of label that the work might have picked up. So if you embed it back in the past a bit.
You can give it some perspective, perhaps.
Well, I think on that thought-provoking note, we'll have some music, which is Lil Burn's unpublished pieces for guitar. So we'll just have a short 3-minute or so break, and welcome back to the Book Lovers Corner, Arrow FM 92.7, kindly sponsored by Elmo's Books of Carterton. And I'm going to talk for a moment or two or three on three recently published novels. Lethal White by Robert Galbraith. That's J.K. Rowling's pseudonym. Sarah Paretsky's Shell Game, and the final one is David Baldacci's Long Road to Mercy. Now we'll go straight first of all to Robert Galbraith's novel called Lethal White. It's the fourth one of a series that feature Cormoran Strike, who is a war veteran turned private detective. The first books were Cuckoo's Calling, The Silkworm, Career of Evil. So Lethal White is the fourth. They are, in fact, also I didn't know, but being made into, or have been made into a BBC TV series with Tom Burke as Cormoran Strike and his offsider, Robin, as Holiday Granger. Now, I gather you've actually watched them.
I'm sure they probably turned up on TV1, and once a high-valued, well-produced, very slick, looking at London and all its variety, and the characters are engaging, and they are of the detective, the private eye, tackling the case and beating all the sort of misfortune and that swirls around solving a mystery, engaging and a reasonable adaptation.
Great. Well, this particular recent one, which I think is being made or just has been made but not out yet with BBC, Lethal White, is set in London in 2012 at the time of the Olympics, where the main concern of everybody was, could they get tickets to the Olympics for the events that they wanted to get tickets for? And I think it would be a very different London today. So, when we think about London today and London in 2012, a lot has happened since then. Cormoran Strike, as I say, a war vet turned private detective, and he's a war vet who has lost a limb. And that makes me quite... I have an empathy for him, having grown up as the daughter of a father who stepped on a mine freeing Florence at the end of the Second World War. And when I read about Cormoran Strikes, about his stump and the issues that he has about mobility with a stump and with artificial legs and so on, it brings back to me a lifetime of being with my father and the issues of having problems with stumps and what surfaces from that. And I'm very impressed that J.K. Rowling, as Robert Galbraith, seems to have got that spot on. The fact that it brings back so many memories to me, I think is really, really interesting. This particular one is it's a lot of a tangle of knots. There are two sort of layers of story going through.
Two crimes, or?
Yes, two crimes, but you don't think they're interconnected, but in fact they, like as happens, can be. And they feature things like the corrupt government officials and they who abuse their power. Well, I mean, that hasn't gone away. That's still the case. Far left anti-Semitic characters, Semitic characters, and that also is very current. And troubled relationships wherever you look. And in fact, the novel starts in the church with Cormoran Strike coming fresh from a murder that he and his offsider Robin have solved. And there's Robin at the beginning, right at the aisle, saying "I do" to this bloke that she's had an on-off relationship, but they've known each other forever. And a lot of the novel, as with the whole thread of their relationship, there's been a tension between the two of them, and you also always think, well, they must get it together. There's obviously an attraction there. But anyway, she marries this bloke, and by the end of the novel, you think, oh, thank goodness she's got over him, it's sorted. Why she marries him in the first place when he has in fact deleted from her telephone all her messages, quite crucially involved with the solving of this serial killer that they have just finished doing. What a despicable character he is.
You've got to keep remember, Strike is this professional soldier, now compromised with his injury. So he's not going to be James Bond as he moves around through the crime solving, but he's still very, very resourceful and very smart.
Yeah, I really like him as a character.
The title.
Yes, that's what I was going to ask too. Is it about drugs?
Pardon?
Is it drugs?
Is it the wedding?
Well, again, it's the layers, but also anti-Semitic. You've got layers within layers, and you've got the far left white nationalists. Right. Mm-hmm. Lethal white.
Mm-hmm. That would fit.
Well, marriage, wearing a white wedding gown, lethal white. Mm-hmm. You could read it on a number of levels.
Good.
Which I think is,
These books have gained a readership, I think, around the world. I mean, there's no doubt Rowling can write. Do they sell well?
They do. They come in and they're out. They go.
I can understand because, you've had a busy day, you want to relax, to have a book that you can open up and page turn and really enjoy and be in a different world is quite a lot of solace in this day and age, I think.
I mean, it's Rowling's attempt to get out an adult audience. What's the age? Well, who are the target audience for this?
Adults.
Crime lovers of all ages.
Well, I wondered whether she also is trying to bring across, when she wrote Harry Potter, she had a young audience, but they're growing up and they'll be wanting a different sort of genre to read.
Good point.
And maybe it's that transition from mystery and mayhem of childhood and into the adult form. I don't know.
They're not high action from what I can remember, though, are they? It's more.
What, the Harry Potter?
No, the.
It's more the
Cormoran
sleuth.
Strike. This is an old-fashioned sort of feel about this characters and the story.
Well, and that also gives comfort for those of us who are getting older and who get a lot of comfort from what we have got used to. And not having, if we want to be confronted with a different world where we can go out and read other genres. But I find this very comforting, this sort of reading this book, these books.
Good. So you are the target audience then?
And you enjoy it too, Gareth, don't you?
I do. As they come out, I'm not like must have it immediately, but I do keep an eye out for it in the library, and eventually it's sitting there waiting for me. And I'm more than happy to pick it up.
But I think also you watch what's coming out and you are ordering online. I can remember you being very disappointed, Lee Child not coming up for some time and being put down the list.
Well, no, Lee, you have to read it to be in the discussion, in the month that it's released, and it only has a short few months where it's really before
the next one
before the next one, yeah. So, but they are. I mean, it is series crime writing where our characters are developing and we're watching them change and get better at their private investigating.
Well, that takes me into another one. So away from Britain and over to the States. And Sarah, I'm not sure how it's pronounced, Paretsky, Shell Game. And she has a female protagonist, V.I. Wachowski. And this particular book again has several layers within it. One of them is centres around the grisly murder of an archaeology student who is connected to Felix Herschel, who is the nephew of Lottie Herschel, who is a great friend of VI's. She's a doctor, and VI often has to fetch up and have something sewn up or something cleaned or something a bullet removed. Or so Lottie and VI, because of family history in the past, have very, very close friendship. And so VI is brought into this tale to help solve the problem.
So is the main character a male or female?
VI is a woman, Victoria Efigenia Wachowski,
Wow.
she's called.
Great
so you
name.
can see why she's called VI.
Yes.
And so that's well worth a read. And again, you follow through, it's a series that you follow through. Each story is self-contained, but there is, as with the Cormoran Strike ones, a thread through. And then the third book is David Baldacci's Long Road to Mercy. And he has written his first ever female protagonist. And I have to say, I really, really enjoyed her. She's a very sassy, intelligent woman, Atlee by name, Atlee. She comes with a past where she has been, her twin sister and her were sleeping in the same bedroom, and the twin sister was abducted when they were 5. And so this is a thread through, which is obviously going to be a thread through all the succeeding books as well, as she tries to find out what happened to her twin sister. It's obviously a very, very deep, meaningful loss. But The Long Road to Mercy the title refers to Mercy, which is the twin sister's name, but it also again has another meaning about the other layer, which is about her being a FBI agent on the edge of the Great Canyon. She's a very sort of isolate sort of character and doesn't want to belong. She could be, a Top Gun profiler, but no, she wants to be, out of the general mainstream and be in the wilderness, really, but does this job of solving a case which starts off with a mutilated carcass of a mule in the Grand Canyon. And that leads on to a significant other story. And I think it's about time for us to go back over what our books is that we've had today. Gareth, please.
I looked at William Boyd's Love is Blind. Love is Blind, the idea behind that is that when we are love, in fact, blinds us to all sorts of actions of others.
Thank you.
Okay, I looked at A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles, and also Machines Like Me by Ian McEwan, which I forgot to say is not out until April. I had an advance copy, and thank you very much for that.
And I look forward to reading it when it comes out. My books were David Baldacci's Long Road to Mercy, Sarah Paretsky's Shell Game, and Robert Galbraith's Lethal White. And so that's what we've done, what we've been through today, and I look forward to seeing you both here at Arrow FM in a month's time. And thank you for being here. Thank you, listeners, and goodbye. We sign out.